be a sponge, and then bring the juice.
By focusing on your improvement, by focusing on your progress, and eliminating any fixed mindset that you may have and acts of perfectionism, then you encourage your own mastery.
On some level, we do what we want to do 24 hours a day. Now, sometimes it may not seem like that, but if I'm choosing to work instead of sleep, what I'm actually saying is keeping my job is more important than sleeping.
I'm tired of this. I'm tired of getting beat. What can I do to get over this hump? So mentally, that's when I kind of put that forefront, like, hey, it's either all or nothing.
I like to put failure in quotations because I don't believe that failure is true failure if you're looking at it with the right mindset.
The truth is, the journey to greatness is hard. It takes time, it takes effort, it takes focus, and every day you have to decide what you value, what you want to pursue, and what you want to achieve. And if you dig deep enough, if you push hard enough, we all have what it takes to be great. Welcome to the Edge of Greatness. Hello, and welcome back to another episode of the Edge of Greatness podcast. I'm your host, Charles Schultz, and today I have a very special guest with me. He is actually one of my old training clients who is also pursuing a career in writing, and I feel like a lot of the things that we've talked about on the show so far have been really sports related, but I think what I really want to make sure is hammered home is that greatness is pursued all the time. It's not just in the athletic realm. There are things that we can do after our sports careers are over, because let's be honest, the people who make it to the highest level is very small. It's not a large percentage. So when that time comes that you're done playing your sport, whenever that may be, I want you to continue to pursue greatness. And this is an opportunity for me to have a conversation with Jason Dutton here. And his habits, his rituals, how he goes about his day, in his pursuit of getting his book published. So thank you, Jason, for joining us. It's a pleasure to have you on the show.
Yeah, my pleasure. Good to be here.
Awesome. So talk to me a little bit about kind of what you've been doing, what you're up to lately, because I know you've been working on this novel that you've written for a little while now.
Sure.
Are we expanding on it? Are we doing more? What's the latest?
Okay, well, the really brief timeline would be I started writing a book back in May of 2016, and a year later, May 2017, I finished it. I completely finished it. It took me 6 months to write the first draft, another 6 months to have it edited and get feedback and edit it myself and get ready for agents. Then 2017 through beginning of 2019 was trying to get agents for that book, and then working on a sequel because I originally envisioned this all to be a trilogy. And then in August of 2019, it occurred to me that I could write the first book better. I had enough life experience and had enough feedback from agents and so on. So in August of 2019, I'd started rewriting that first book, and I'm still doing that. I'm about 200 pages in now. The first draft, the original draft, was 400 pages, so probably about halfway there. And then once I get that done, that'd be I'll send the draft to agents that were previously interested in the first draft, if that makes sense, but weren't interested enough to represent, and just say, hey, here's a redone version of it, essentially, and you had already shown interest. And so what do you think? So that's kind of where I am now, and implemented especially in quarantine, it was important for me to have a routine where I made sure I had some structure to my day. So I've been writing pretty much every day since quarantine started in March, except for Sundays. I try to make that a day of rest, but that's kind of what we're doing these days.
Oh, that's awesome. So for those of you listening at home, obviously he mentioned he started, you said 2016, right?
Yeah, it's been like 4.5 years now. Yeah.
So, I mean, a lot of times we pick up these books and we read them and we're excited about what we just picked up and read. And we're like, man, this guy's really good and he must be great. And they lose sight of the fact that there's a process to this. Like
Sure.
The people like Stephen King and, the recognizable names like that, who everyone knows who they are. They didn't just write a book in 6 months to get published. The first book they did took time, and there's habits involved, and there's some goal setting. And so what I want to dig into right now is, because you're in that process of building that first novel to go to publish,
Sure.
What are you doing right now? What are your habits as far as when it comes to your writing? Because you mentioned you're writing every day. I'm assuming that there's some kind of habitual stuff you're doing.
Yeah, well, right now, I don't have, this is on a Skype call, so you can maybe see, I've got a spreadsheet. And starting back in March when we were kind of in pandemic and got locked down, for a while, I just kind of did what we needed to do to get through the day and tried to write regularly. And I think it was May where I came up with the idea of actually having a spreadsheet with different columns for like, I'm going to make sure I get dressed before I start my work from home instead of like lounging around in pajama pants, or I'm going to try to make sure I read and listen to music every day. And one of those things that I have a daily check mark for is writing, just to make, and I'm one of these people that does really well with structure, does really well with checking things off a list. I don't have a requirement. I used to have a requirement. Beginning of May, it was I was going to write for an hour every day. I tried to be flexible with that because there are some days where you just don't have the time and you set yourself up for failure if you're going to, say, for instance, work in an hour to write, but then you get to bed 2 hours later and then the next day is wrecked or whatever it is. But so right now my habit is writing every day and writing. There's no minimum on that. Some days it's literally 5 or 10 minutes. Sometimes it's an hour or two. And for me, the goal is to get myself to sit down at the desk and start going, and usually that's enough. That's enough to get the creativity going. And then, maybe it's for 20 minutes, maybe nothing really flows that day, but keeping in that regular habit, I think goes a long, long way toward making progress.
I love the checklist stuff because I think that's something that helps a lot of people because we're so busy in today's world and there's so many distractions. I mean, we find ourselves wanting to do something and then you get interrupted by whatever it may be. Like there's so many different options. Obviously, we have our phones that have all the different social media apps, and then we have phone calls from work. I was actually just listening to a book on tape about I want to say it's called The One Thing.
Okay.
You ever read that one? You ever heard that?
I think I might have heard the title. I haven't read it though.
Okay. But they're talking about kind of what you did with setting up a like a daily planner of this is what's my number one important thing that I want to accomplish, and having time set aside for that thing. Yeah. And sounds like you kind of do something similar, maybe not to the detailed extent that the author was talking about, but.
Well, the scheduling kind of happens, or at least for me, as a natural extension of having the checklist. Because at some point, like I said, okay, I've got to, for instance, so it's get up in the morning, get dressed for work, do my Bible study because I'm very spiritual. I go to church and that's an important part of my life. So get up in the morning, do my Bible study, do writing, do reading. And at some point, because the days look so similar in quarantine and because all of these things were items for every day, I started unconsciously kind of starting a routine. Like I get out of bed in the morning and I do some push-ups and then I listen to an audiobook and some music as I'm getting ready for the day. And so it's not that I have a calendar, it's more so, or like a daily schedule. It's more like I figured out sort of instinctively when each of these activities would best start, like best fit. And sometimes that gets jumbled if I am a little slower getting ready for the day or something, for instance, but it all gets done. And I feel like the one thing that's most beneficial for me is as soon as I make something, even in my head, mandatory, as soon as I take it off of like my list of options, as long as I say like, I have to write today, like that's non-negotiable. It's just when I write and for how long. I think that helps me a lot in terms of getting something done because I mean, I enjoy writing. It's what I love to do. I hope one day to do it professionally, but I'm definitely one of those people where it's like, oh, you can do whatever you want today. I'll tend toward inaction, maybe. I'll rather watch Netflix than do the thing until I sit and I say, well, we're gonna make this is a requirement, not in a punishing way, but it's like, well, I'm gonna feel better after I do this. So let's make sure we do this kind of a thing.
Yeah, it's kind of like making time for your passion,
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. And a lot of times, like I think I mentioned it before, is we tend to say we don't have time for things, but yet we make time for the stuff we don't need to do. Like you mentioned, you like to sit down and watch Netflix. Who doesn't? Right? We all get sucked into shows. We all have things that we're like, man, this is great. Let's go another episode. Here we go. The next thing you know, you're like 3.5 hours. What have I been doing?
Right.
And so by creating those non-negotiables, by creating that this is my thing, you've eliminated the odds of going an entire day without at least keeping it in the front of your mind.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's not a punishment. It's not like, trying to think of an example of something I just loathe doing. I don't know. I don't like doing laundry, but I do it so that my clothes are clean. This is a little different where I know as long as I get in front of the computer, I'm always going to be glad that I wrote. It's kind of the same thing of like, you and I have been doing physical training for, I think I've been with you for like the last decade probably. And there were Saturday mornings where we would schedule an 8 o'clock workout session, and getting up at 6 to get in the car to do that, like that's the last thing I want to do in that moment. But then if you get there, if you do the workout, there's never been a time where I've gone, oh, I'm sorry that I went through the time to get to the gym. So for me, it's about sort of metaphorically getting off my butt and putting myself in a situation to do what I know I'm going to enjoy in the first place, that kind of thing.
Yeah, no, I like that because that's the thing. Sometimes you need that little bit of push to get started rolling.
Right.
But just like a rock down the hill, once you get it moving, you're good until an obstacle pops up in your way, you know?
Yeah. Yeah. And I'm a big believer in what you just said, as far as we find time for the stuff we want to do. I think we really do, on some level, we do what we want to do 24 hours a day. Now, sometimes it may not seem like that, but if I'm choosing to work instead of sleep, what I'm actually saying is keeping my job is more important than sleeping. You're making priority statements throughout the day with everything you do. And as long as you own those decisions, and that's been good for me too, is sort of saying like, look, I am in control of my schedule. It's not like some external force is jerking me this way and that. And like, oh, I'm just so sorry because life got crazy and I quote unquote didn't have time to write. Well, life may have gotten crazy and I may have made decisions that resulted in me not writing those that day. And those might even been good decisions. I mean, there have been days where I haven't written because I had a family activity or something, and that's fine. Like that's a decision that I own. But I'm not saying that life kept me from writing. I'm saying I chose to do this other thing, because I feel like a lot of people, like I think you were just saying, kind of look at it like their life is outside of their own control. Like, wow, I'd really love to write this book or lose 40 pounds or whatever, but like life's just crazy. And a lot of people have crazy lives with, I should mention, I'm a single guy without any kids or anything. So it's not like I have people demanding my attention most of the time. I have a lot more flexibility than other people do, but you still make priority statements. And if losing that weight or writing that book is really important to you, you will do that instead of, again, watching Netflix. Not that I hate Netflix, but that's the example that keeps coming to mind because that's a very low activity. You're not really, you kind of receive information. So
right. That, and it's universally used. I mean, it's easy to use that as an example because everybody knows what Netflix is.
Right. Yeah.
We made that choice to sit down and watch an episode. You made a choice to go to the bar. You made a choice to do these things. And that might have been one of the best snippets of conversation that I've had in a long time when it comes to explaining the choice piece of it, because I think that's awesome. And I think that's something I've been trying to hammer home for a while is we all have choices that we make. And I love the way you put it into words right there, because I think that that's something that'll resonate with a lot of the listeners is, it's okay to choose a different path from time to time. It's okay to choose this over that, even if that is my priority, but this needs to be done right now. You know what I'm saying? And I think that was the best way of explaining it that I've heard in a long time. So that's awesome. I appreciate that.
Well, thank you. Yeah. The other thing I think is important to own, like there were plenty of writing projects. I've been writing since I was in third grade to some degree or another. And I went to school for it and I got an undergraduate degree and I got a master's degree. And there have been projects that I've started because I felt like that should be what I would be writing or what would make me successful or what my professors wanted me to write. And those projects were abandoned eventually. But while I was working on them, there were plenty of days where I would sort of beat myself up and go, you're a writer, you should be writing. Why is this not going better? And I think it's really important to own when you don't want to do things either. Like if you start writing a book and it's not going for you and you're not going well for you and you're loathing every minute you're working on it, it's really okay at some point to go, look, I'm not an author, or being an author is not important enough to me to keep, this is not something I'm enjoying. And so you can own your priorities just as much as you can own the things that aren't important for you. Because if you're trying to be something that you're not, if you're like, I took piano lessons when I was very young, and I followed it up with guitar lessons, and it would be great to be able to play the piano or the guitar, but I recognize that neither one of those things are important enough to me to put in the time and the effort that it would require for me to become really good at it. And that's a decision that I've owned. Like, it's like, well, I'd like to be able to play the guitar, but I know that that's not something I want to put my heart into. So I'm abandoning that and going on to something that's actually worthwhile for me personally.
Right. No, and I like that. To kind of expand upon that is you talked about, like, maybe you're not an author, but maybe you're not writing the right stuff.
Right.
You know?
Yeah, exactly.
So that could be another avenue, is like, just because it's not going well right now and there's certain things you don't like, it doesn't mean you have to cut that entire path off.
Right.
Maybe you just take another branch of that path.
Right.
Yeah. Like, for example, like as my athletes, some of them don't like to train,
Sure.
and I get that, but that training is crucial to being successful as an athlete.
Oh yeah.
Maybe you just haven't found the right training partner. Maybe you haven't found the right training methodology. Just because it doesn't feel right now, or that path doesn't suit you, doesn't mean you have to cut that path off and go the other direction. You can
completely
kind
agree.
of veer off, right?
Yeah.
And that's kind of the thing that came to mind with that is, you were talking about, like, you see yourself as a writer, but yet you were writing things you were like, I don't want to write this. But then you found a passion in this new story.
True. Yes.
And it's become easier.
Right.
So now you're writing the things you want to write.
Yeah.
And I think that's valuable too. So
enjoying the work goes a long, long way. You have to ask yourself, what's your goal and why do you want it? Like, for me, it's like, yeah, I would love to be a guitar player, but that's pretty much useless if I don't actively enjoy playing guitar. There are plenty of things like, I'd love to be able to speak 5 languages, because wouldn't that be cool and useful? But if you don't enjoy the language part of it, or if you want to be, there are plenty of people who want to be writers because there was a book I read forever ago that says, do you want to write a book, or do you want to have written a book? And the difference between the two is, I mean, having written a book is great. You can go to book signings, you can give the book to people, but the reality of it, writing a book is a long, sometimes very frustrating process. So if you don't enjoy that at all, getting to the point where you've written a book is going to be hellish for you. And just like having the self-awareness to go, here's what's important, and yes, I am willing to do what it takes to get here, is really important, I think.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And it's actually, I'm glad you mentioned the process part, because I want to build off that.
Yeah.
It's one of the pieces I wanted to talk about. How do you stay motivated during this long, enduring process? With the other thing that people don't understand is how many query letters have you sent out?
Oh my God. I mean, like 40. There have been a lot.
Right. So,
yeah.
So being told, it's really good, but not for me, 40 different times in 40 different ways, it could really be like, man, maybe this isn't for me. Right. So talk to me. How do you stay motivated during this process? What keeps you on your writing habit? How do you do that?
Well, the number one thing for me is I like the writing, is that I don't, strictly speaking, write to get published, is that I'm writing because I enjoy the story. So that if, God forbid, I never get published, that's not the end of the world, kind of a thing. That's a big thing. And also, I believe in the story. There was a book that I wrote in college that was okay. I mean, I'm glad that I wrote it, and I tried to get it published, and I gave up after maybe 6 rejection letters, for the reason that you're kind of stating, is like, well, nobody wants it. But also at the core of it, I'm like, well, I don't believe this should be out there either. I don't believe in it enough to sort of, suffer through 40 rejection letters. But yeah, I'd say the main thing is liking what you're doing, is knowing that you're doing it for the sake of doing it and not just getting published. Because if that was my goal, I mean, that would be a whole other set of benchmarks. You'd be aiming for whatever you think other people would want to have, and kind of that would be your journey. I'm doing it more because I think this particular story needs to be out there. Also, it was more or less easier to hang on to it even in pandemic, because it gave me a creative outlet. I mean, it was something to do during this period of time where we're not interacting with each other. We're not going places. I'm not going to the gym or whatever. You know, I do exercises around here, but writing for me is something that, like, I get to use my brain, you know? So, you have to believe, I mean, I guess your question initially was, how do you keep motivated in the face of constant rejection? One of them would be, you have to believe in what you're doing. You have to enjoy what you're doing. You also can't take the rejection personally, which is very hard to do when you've got something, essentially a part of you that you've created, and you're saying, here, take this. And they're saying, no, I'd rather not. But there are so many factors that go into whether or not an agent accepts a book. They could have too many clients already. They could not particularly jive with what you wrote. They could be having a bad day. They could like the book but think it's difficult to sell. I mean, these are all reasons that have very little to do with how good your book is. So I had to get to the point where there was this whole process where, thank God I could do this via email, but you'd send out a query letter, or I would send them out in batches of, I think I'd make sure I had something like 10 or 15 out at a time. And you'd get a rejection letter back. I'd mark it on my spreadsheet, and then I'd send another letter out. You know, it became a routine. It became something to do that was divorced from, like, oh my gosh, they don't like me, or I'm worthless. It was just like, okay, this is part of the process. And what helped me a lot with that is every single writer that I've talked to, every article I've read, all of them have said, look, you're going to get rejection letters. This is not, like, unusual, right? So it helped me to realize that it wasn't that I was worthless as a person. It's just that every writer, and there are exceptions to every rule. I'm sure there are people who, you know, contacted their first agent and there you go, you know, but most people, you have to go through that sort of sea of rejection letters, and so many people have ways of dealing with that. But knowing that that was not an indication that I sucked, you know, as a writer, that and I should also say, like, having done this long enough and having gone to school for it and having tried to write another book, like, I also have a pretty good perception of my talent and my own skill. So it's like, well, I know I don't suck, like, I'm not awful. So carrying that around with me is like, okay, well, I'm not worthless because this person thinks I am, or whatever. So we're going to keep going with what I know to be true about myself and my work.
No, yeah, I love that, because we hear it all the time. Don't take it. It's not personal.
Yeah.
And it's hard not to feel like it's personal when you've put your heart and soul into something you're pursuing.
Oh, absolutely.
You know, yeah. Our instant response is, well, why not? I put all my effort into this. This is my heart and soul. I just laid it on the table, and you decided to stab it with a knife. You know, that's not cool. and that goes for all things, right? You know, that goes for all avenues, like, you know, with writing, with professions, with, you know, sports. You know, we're all, the things we're passionate about, we go all in on.
Yeah.
You know, that's just how it is. That's how you pursue it with excellence. And to separate knowing your worth and knowing what you're putting into something from what other people perceive, because there's always going to be negative comments. There's always going to be naysayers. There's always going to be people who are doubting, or not even, like you said, not even doubting, but not, sorry, this isn't the right time for me. This isn't the right place, whatever it may be. It is awesome. I love that. So what I want to do now, since we're getting close to the new year, and your interview is going to actually launch probably the right after the new year, so that first week in January, when everyone's going to be looking at New Year's goals. And
sure,
I'm not going to use the word resolution.
Oh no, I heard that. Yeah, I know how you feel about it, and I feel the same way. Frankly, I've never made a New Year's resolution that I don't think I've made a resolution that has been successful. I think my goals have been successful when I've made them independent of that, you know, so I couldn't agree more on that one.
So speaking on goals, what are some of your goals going into this year?
Well, that's a good question, because I don't know. Shamefully enough, I don't know that I've given it a lot of thought. I want to have a definitive draft of this current book done. I think, and this is intimidating saying it on a podcast, right?
Yeah, we're gonna hold you to it now.
My plan is to get it done by the end of March. I think that'll be easy enough, and then hopefully, and really, I want to get an agent by the end of 2021. but I say that with a bit of an asterisk, knowing that so much of that is outside of my control. I think a more reasonable goal there would be, I want to send query letters to all of the people that I think might be interested by 2020, like the end of 2021, that kind of thing.
I like that.
So,
yeah.
those are two
Yeah,
major
no,
ones.
I like how you have a like that out there goal, but you understand that like the only way you get to that out there goal is to do your part of the process, because the other parts are out of your control.
Right, exactly.
And I think that's one of the big things when it comes to goal setting is set big goals, but then how does this part of your daily routine, of your monthly routine lead to your big goal? And I think that's the big thing that I loved about that. So with those goals and that sort of thing, when you wrap up, what's the next phase? So you're rewriting this book, right?
Mhm.
It's copy number 2, basically,
Sure.
of the same story. Do you still see it as a trilogy, or has your whole mindset on this story now changed?
I think for right now, the whole mindset of the story had changed, and that was a conscious decision I made even the first time. And I know this might be confusing for listeners, so I wish we had better terminology. But like the first draft I ever wrote, I wanted to concentrate on that draft. I didn't want to start thinking like, is this going to be a trilogy? How is this going to work? Because it was important to me not to keep blinders on, but I know it could be intimidating to go, okay, well, what am I doing next? I wanted my focus to be on what I was doing then. And then the idea for the second and the third book came organically as I was writing the first one, and that was fine. And then when I wrote, I'll call it the reboot. So I'm working on the reboot now, and it's incorporating a lot of the stuff that I had in the sequel already, because I had started working on the sequel a while back. So some of the stuff that's in the sequel is now in book 1. So I guess the easiest and less complicated answer would be, if at some point I come up with an idea for a sequel, I'd love to do one. But right now it's a standalone book, just because it's easier for me to manage that way, you know?
Okay. Yeah, no, that's cool. And that's kind of funny because I don't know how many of the listeners know, but I also am a very bad writer that has 2 stories that I've completed that are not very good. But I was doing
I love how you said you're also a really bad writer.
Yeah, just for you. Yeah. No. No, anyway, it was planned on being a trilogy, and I've started that rewrite, but I brought in the pieces from the second book into the first to make it just one longer, not necessarily longer because I'm cutting stuff out, but one more, I guess, straightforward storyline instead of it being 2 separate stories. And I'm curious is, how did you feel when you went back to make that change? Because, we talked about like having this vision of what we want to make happen or what our goals are. And then to like get done with a project to get to this point and then go, you know what? I'm going to start it over. We're going to go a different direction. Like, how do you get to that point?
Oh, it was incredibly, it was intimidating and frightening, because I had so August of 2019. So I had been working on it from May of 2016 until then. And I had also, we haven't mentioned this, but like I was doing weekly updates on Facebook from day one of writing this thing. I would put out a weekly update for my own accountability, and I would say, so this is day 50 and I've done X amount. And so there are these people that are following the progress, and a lot of them had said, when am I going to get to read it? When's it going to be done? And I was very protective of that for a number of reasons. But one of my concerns with going back and saying we're going to start it again was essentially turning back the clock on all of these people who had been sort of patiently waiting for me to get the hell done with this thing. And that was a big thing to say, look, guys, I'm sorry, but like I'm going to go ahead and redo. And it wasn't like trying to figure out the best way to describe it, because it's not, I guess reboot would work, because it's not like I'm scrapping everything that I wrote before. It's more like the draft I have informs the new one. And now that I'm 200 pages in, like it was absolutely the right idea, because I'm having a lot of fun with it. I'm realizing how I've grown as a writer and a person. Like that was absolutely the right way to go. But it was terrifying in the moment, because you're like, well, do I really want to give this up and try again? Or the fact that I'm trying again, does it mean that the entire thing is not worth it or whatever? And, what it really came down to is it didn't have anything to do in the moment. It didn't have anything to do with whether it was publishable. It didn't have anything to do with, whether I would be more popular. It had to do with, well, what do I want to do as a writer? What's more fun, and this is it. I mean, a lot of writers fall prey to trying to write for that target of, can I get it out there? And I've always said, write what you want to write, because that's going to be better for you, like more fun for you. But ultimately, coming up with something that personal that you enjoyed that much is going to show through in the writing. So that was what eventually moved me forward, was like, yeah, no, I'm really excited about the stuff that I can implement now that I had, but it's funny to think, like, if somebody had told me when I started, it's like, okay, well, this is going to be at least a 4-year process and you're going to start over again and all these different things. I don't know whether I would have set out on doing that. That doesn't sound like a fun ride, at the beginning, because at the beginning you're like, well, surely this will be out in like 2 years. I get this done in a year and then I get an agent within the next year. And then maybe year 3 is when it gets published. To think that you would still be working on it now is intimidating, but that's one of the reasons why I try to focus on where I am now and the step we are in now, instead of going, oh my gosh, this is going to take forever, because that's when I mentally start to lock up and freak out a little bit, Yeah,
no, I agree. It's so easy to look ahead or look back and not live or stay in the moment. And the truth of it is the past has already happened. You can't change it. And the future is unpredictable. So you can't really affect it with anything other than what you're doing right this second.
Yeah.
And so what I want to ask you now is if, for other people out there who are pursuing stuff and they've been doing it for a while, they're really pushing, what advice would you give them if they reach that crossroads and they're having to make a decision about powering on in the same direction or basically blowing it all up and starting over? What would you tell them as far as helping them kind of navigate those waters?
Well, you have to be flexible with your goals, right? So I'm one of these people that's very rule based, very structure based, so that if I wanted to power through with something, there's a good chance I would do it regardless of what was going on around me, because I'd already decided to. And you have to have that flexibility at certain points to kind of stick your head up and go look around and go, well, am I still enjoying this? Is this something that I'm still going to benefit from? And if the answer is yes, then keep powering through. It's weird, because there are times when you need to power through and there are times where you need to take an inventory. And I really can't tell you, that's a very individual process. I can't tell you when to buckle down and when to look up. But if people are at that point where they're like, look, this is getting difficult, I need to reevaluate whether to start over or scrap it entirely or whatever, or keep going. My answer would be, first, you need to take a close look at the goal that you're trying to reach and why. Is that still important to you? And what specifically about it is important to you? And then also just say, look, is this, I know specifically with writing, but, is this something that you're enjoying? If you're loathing every minute of it, then that's probably a good sign. Physical training is tricky, because I personally always enjoy working out, even if it's brutal. I know there are a lot of people that, okay, I want to lose this weight, and going to the gym is a lot like going to hell for me, because physically it's not fun, So right. that makes it a little more complicated, because sometimes you'll have to do stuff that you really don't like to do in order to get to where you want to be. So that's why that's a little tricky, because I've never not enjoyed writing. There are difficult writing days, but even on the most difficult of writing days, I feel better for having written. So there needs to be some sort of individual evaluation of like, okay, how important is it for me to lose this weight or whatever? Right. And I would always, I'm always for physical fitness, but I would say that is like, if you really don't want to be in good shape, then own that and move on with your life. Like, if this is going to be something that you keep, a good example would be like, the reason that I didn't say I'm going to do 10 pages a day or something, is because I knew that that was not going to happen. So I didn't want to set myself up for daily failure, because you're just going to get in your own head and knock yourself down. And then I'm probably not going to want to write at all, right? If I keep failing every day. Instead, I said, we're going to write whatever we feel like writing, because that was the amount of motivation and freedom that I needed. And frankly, if you're going to set yourself up for, I want to lose this weight, but I don't want it enough to work very hard at it, you're going to spend every day just hating yourself for not doing what you're trying to resolve to do. And that's no way to live your life, you know?
Right, right. So it's almost kind of like evaluating it. Are my struggles now worth the result that I want to achieve?
Yeah. Yeah.
Because there's going to be struggles no matter what path you choose, right? I mean, you said there's tough days for writing, but you know that those tough days are worth it because the outcome of finishing your story, getting your work complete is worth the struggle.
Yeah.
Right?
And that's, pardon me, I'll get some water while I'm
no worries. Yeah.
I don't know. It would figure that my voice is going on the day that I have
right. Yeah. Excuse me.
sound gruff and manly.
Yeah, that's right.
Now I got to figure out what I was going to say.
Yeah, we were talking about like the struggle being worth the outcome.
Yeah. Oh, I know what I was going to say. So for me, buckling that, the decision of whether the struggle is going to be worth the outcome should not be made in the midst of the struggle, if that makes sense. Like,
yes, absolutely.
The one big philosophy I have for physical training, every time I come in to train with you, I do whatever you like. I leave my free will at the door for an hour. If you say, go do 100 push-ups, I may not be happy about it, but I'm not sitting here going, well, I don't know if I can do it. It's just, I take that entire thing out of my brain and I just go, Charles told me to do push-ups. I'm going to go do push-ups. We've already decided that. We decided that this morning when we came to the gym. This isn't something that we're renegotiating while we're doing it, because the moment you start thinking about how hard something is while you're doing it is a really easy way to sort of weaken yourself, you know? So as that applies to writing, I've already decided I'm going to write every day. And if it turns out, if I look back at a month and I go, well, crap, we wrote every day, but I hated it and we only got 5 pages, so maybe we should reevaluate what we're doing moving forward. That's fine. I can do that, but I shouldn't make that decision if I'm in the middle of a really hard paragraph or something, because that's just me being irritated in the moment. That's not me making a larger decision for my own good, if that makes sense.
No, I like that. And that comments about like not making a decision in the moment of like when it sucks. Have you read Can't Hurt Me by David Goggins?
I gave it to my brother as a gift, so I really
did you?
Check it out.
Okay, yeah. But he talks about that like during his like, what was it, 3 hell weeks in a row?
Yeah.
Like he goes, I know this sucks, but I can't think about how bad it sucks while it's sucking, because then I'm like, well, I'm gonna quit. And
exactly.
I think a lot of people can use that, and instead of focusing on the negative in the moment, just look to the future, hang on to what you're doing, and then reevaluate afterwards. Is it worth me doing that again?
Yeah. That's I think it's a practical mindset that I sort of adopted. I have cerebral palsy. I walk with a walker. And so some things are harder for me physically than other people. So there are times where like I'll park my car and I'll have to go across a parking lot in the middle of August or something like that. And it's like, well, I know where I want to go. Like, I know that not going to this building is not an option. So it doesn't do me any good to think about how much it's sucking to walk across this parking lot. You're going to do it. So you take the suffering out of the equation. And afterward, when you're sitting down and drinking water and sweating all over the place, you can congratulate yourself for getting that done. But it doesn't do you any good with every step you're taking going, oh, this sucks. This still sucks. Because you're not doing yourself any favors at all.
Right. And then you find yourself halfway across the parking lot deciding, do I continue on or what do I do? Because now I'm stuck.
Point, yeah, you're past the point of no return at that. Exactly.
Yeah,
exactly right.
And for those of you, like he said, he has CP, and he comes in here and trains, and it's awesome to watch him inspire those around, because you in the training world, you see so many people who come in here and like he was talking about, oh, I don't know if I can do that. I don't know. The word can't doesn't exist for Jason. And that's one of the best things that I can say about this man. And that's why I wanted to have him on the show, because while this process has taken multiple years, I guarantee there's never been a moment that he said, well, I can't write or I can't do this. There might've been moments where you were like, oh man, this is starting to be tough.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, that's the reason why I wanted you on, and it's for those types of words of wisdom that I feel like people don't get all the time.
Sure.
So,
well, that's even
as far
been a
as
philosophy when we've been working out. That has always been, it's never been, well, I don't want to make any generalizations, but generally you and I working together are kind of about how can we work out these particular muscles? And then if whatever I'm trying doesn't work, that's fine. We just move on to another thing. It's not that we certainly acknowledge my limitations. You know, it's one thing to say, well, I'm invincible, so I'm going to write 20 pages today, or I'm going to run laps around the gym. I definitely need to know what I'm capable of. But if you start with the assumption that we're going to give this a try until it doesn't work, instead of, I mean, and I've been in the gym with you when I've seen these people that are like, oh my gosh, like I did 5, I don't know that I can do 5 more, and so on. And that's actually, I mean, I've been irritated. You've seen me irritated because I'm over here going, well, like, look, you just walked in here without the assistance of a walker, not to get into my like disabled person soapbox, but it's like, don't tell me that you're like not able to do this when I went over here and did it myself and it's harder for me,
Right. And that's the big thing is don't set yourself up to be failing before you even try it.
Right. Especially because I think the bigger aspect, and this could apply to all those goals, whether I'm trying to write a book or whether you're standing in a gym, if I'm sitting here complaining about it, why are you doing that in the first place? Like, why are you here? I mean, it's easier to visualize when you're in the gym. Because like, look, you took the time to drive to the gym, to step into the gym. Now you're doing exercise in the gym. If you don't want to be here, that's what I mean by like, own it. If you don't want to be doing it, just admit that about yourself and move on with a clear conscience. Don't sit here and like half-heartedly pick up a barbell and then complain about how nothing's happening. You either do it or you don't, kind of a thing.
Yeah, no, yeah. Don't go all in. Don't just work around things hoping that if you just kind of keep going through the motions, eventually something's going to change. Because that's just a waste of everyone's time. It's a waste of your time. It's a waste of whoever you're working with time, and whatever goal you're trying to achieve, you're not going to get there. It's just not going to happen for you.
Sure.
So,
and there's a freedom there too. I mean, if you do run into walls sometimes where literally there's nothing you can do about it. Like, there are things that physically I can't do, or I may not get this book published if no agent wants to represent me, or maybe you don't have time to go to the gym because you have 6 kids or whatever. That's fine. Those are real limitations. But the good news is that's not your fault either. So you can still kind of move on and say like, look, because of things that are literally outside of my control, I can't get this goal. So let's try to figure out what else I want to do in life. Or find an alternate way to work out at home or whatever. Again, it's about setting your priorities and owning what is truly important to you, so that then you can say, instead of saying, because there are so many people, and I'm sure I've fallen into this trap too, of saying like, oh boy, I'd love this, but like, it's so-and-so's fault that this is not happening for me, or such and such a circumstance that this is not happening for me. It's like, maybe that's true, but most of the time, 9 times out of 10, it's because you actually don't want it enough to find a creative solution. That's usually what's happening here. And you would rather blame it on something outside of you so that it's not your fault that you're not achieving what you want to achieve.
No, yeah, hands down. I think that's a great understanding of how things work in this world, because like you said, we are really quick to blame others for our shortcomings or why something didn't go our way. And we don't have the honesty to look at ourselves in the mirror and say, well, this is where you dropped the ball. This is where you went wrong. This is what you need to fix. And because we don't have those conversations, which are difficult, I get it. We don't want to claim that we don't have all the answers or that we're not capable of doing things.
Right.
But at some point you have to acknowledge what you did wrong, where you went wrong, because that's something you can fix.
Yeah.
Like if you're always blaming other people, then you might as well just give up now, because there's no success ever for you because it's always somebody else's fault. Right. I mean,
sure.
somewhere along the way, you have to have some control of your life.
Yeah, and the one of the reasons I'm so glad to be talking to you now is I really agree with your sort of the crux of your podcast, which is, failure sucks, especially for someone like me that is so performance driven. It's oh, I failed at this, I shouldn't have failed at this, why can't I be a better human being? But the truth is, if I hadn't gone through the process of writing that first draft and trying to get it out there and reading feedback and going through what was going through in my life at that time, I wouldn't be here writing a better book. Like there are, it does, I'm not going to say it all works out at the end, but I completely 1000% agree with you that failure is always an opportunity to learn, regardless of whose fault it is. You can use it for something better and almost always end up in a better place. But whether you end up in a better place is almost completely up to you. It's how you handle what happens to you. It's not what happens to you.
Right. Yeah. It's how you respond. It's always going to be how you respond. And so I think that's a fantastic way to put it. And what I want to do, I want to thank you for coming on today. What I want to leave everyone with is if there are listeners who would like to connect with you or follow along on your journey, do you have platforms or email or anything you want to give out to the listeners in case they want to reach out to you, ask you some more questions, or just follow along with your story?
Sure. I have a blog. It's just it's my first name, middle initial, and last name. So Jason B. Dutton, all one word, .com. So jasonbdutton.com is my website. And then if you just want to write me at jason@jasonbdutton.com, that's the easiest way to get in touch with me. And then, we can email back and forth, or I'm happy to be of help to whoever I can be, I guess.
Yeah. Awesome. And I'll make sure I put that in the show notes.
That'd be great.
So that way people can get a hold of you. They'll have access to it pretty easily. Like I said, this episode will air shortly. So we'll make sure we get you out there. But in the meantime, thank you for being a guest. To all my listeners out there, keep reaching for the stars, fall flat on your face. But remember, no matter what happens, whenever we fall, always get up. Thank you for joining us today on the Edge of Greatness podcast. If you haven't yet, please take a minute now to subscribe and review our show. Join us again next week as we continue to dig deeper into the key components of greatness. The path to greatness is never linear, so remember to keep pursuing greatness no matter what. Keep stretching your abilities, reach for the stars, and fall flat on your face. But remember, no matter what happens, whenever we fall, always get up. Until next time, I'm Charles Schultz, and this was the Edge of Greatness podcast.